My name is Michaël Aklin. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'll soon move to EPFL, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. What I'd like to do today is to talk to you about the problem of the clean energy transition from the perspective of the labor market. So not only does the clean energy transition have to happen, but it has to happen fast if we want to limit global warming. And well, here's the thing. To complete the transition, we need to reallocate millions of workers around the world. This, of course, includes coal miners or electricians working in deep mines, but it also includes other people like clerks at gas stations. It could also affect people for working in areas such as the car manufacturing sector or even farmers. And so we don't have many examples of large-scale transitions of this kind. Sure, we could learn from the lessons from the Industrial Revolution when we had thousands, if not millions of people switching from farming to manufacturing, but these were quite different times. And so in the next few minutes, I'd like to make 2 points. So first, what are some of the features of the fossil fuel sector that could make this reallocation of labor, of workers, complicated? And these, as we will see, have to do with geography and the local importance of fossil fuel employers. The second point is, what are the implications of these features for public policy? Have actors like policymakers, governments, nonprofits taken them into account? And what kind of challenges can we expect as countries like the US and others move forward with similar policies? Maybe there are some lessons to be learned, for instance, for the future of the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, so let's get started. What is the problem here? So sometimes I hear people ask questions such as, why should we help coal workers when, say, cab drivers are hired by Uber and deserve as much help? And that's a very fair question. And to answer it, we need to consider two things that make fossil fuel sector special. So first, the fossil fuel industries tend to be geographically concentrated. There might be more cab drivers than coal miners in the United States, but they don't all happen to live in the same community, in the same region. So that's the first point. The second is that fossil fuel employments tend to be locally very dominant. And what I mean by this is that within a certain local labor market, when you have fossil fuel production somewhere, these tend to become very important. That's especially true for coal, which historically has been labor intensive, but it's also true to a lesser degree for oil and gas. And what this means is that fossil fuel companies provide a lot of jobs. They provide a lot of direct jobs, like the kinds I mentioned earlier, say a coal miner. They also provide indirect jobs, think, for instance, of local suppliers. And lastly, they also provide what we call induced jobs. Think here, for instance, of a restaurant who needs coal employees as customers. So these two things, geographic concentration and localized dominance, have important implications. When things go poorly for fossil fuel industries, it's entire regions that are at risk of being trapped in decline and poverty. So going back to our earlier example, a cab driver losing their job is awful. It's horrible. There's no way around it. But the odds are generally pretty good that they would find a new job quite quickly. That's much harder if you are losing your jobs, and so are hundreds of other people with the same kind of skills you have in the same region you live in, and when there are no good alternatives. Some research I've done with two colleagues here at the University of Pittsburgh is that fossil fuel workers in the United States have, over the last 10 years or so, not been very mobile. When they change job, it's very rare for them to go further than 20 miles away from their old one. And so that just reinforces the problem of getting a new job if your old job disappears. And that's what economists tend to call a thin labor market. So, second point, why does this matter and how has it been taken into account? Well, you may have heard about debates between what people call people and place-based policies. Some public policies are designed to help specific people. Think, for instance, of unemployment insurance. These policies tend to be quite helpful because they're not very wasteful. You give money and resources to those who really need it. But here, as we just saw, we have a very geographically constrained problem. And helping fossil fuel workers is all good, But if we try to phase out or reduce the amount of fossil fuels being extracted, it's going to be a lot of workers that are also at risk beyond just those employed by fossil fuel companies. And this is a bit what happened in the Rust Belt in the 70s and after, right? It's entire communities that are at risk. So maybe the most effective way to look at this is not so much at the individual level, but at the regional level. And that's why we sometimes think that place-based policies could be helpful. These are targeted geographically. Right? They are going to be narrowly focusing on a certain area. The downside is, of course, that there could be quite a bit of waste. You could be giving money to the rich people, for instance, in that region. Say, you could subsidize rich folks in West Virginia. The upside is that you try to tackle a regional problem. So what would place-based policies look like here? Well, they could do things such as help fossil fuel workers and others who are interested, reskilling, develop new knowledge and new expertise. Now, you don't want to do this in just any way, but you want to do it in a way that's both respectful of people's aspirations, what they want to do, and also of pre-existing knowledge. Sometimes we hear calls to diversify as much as possible a local economy, but that's seldom going to work based on research that exists out there. In general, you want to take into account the kind of knowledge and expertise that people already have. Another example would be to help, for instance, prop up local labor markets for blue-collar workers and help them find new positions. If you are a professional in a white-collar position, well, it's generally easy to find a new job, even if it's across the country. You update your resume on LinkedIn, and you wait until you get some hits somewhere. It's much rarer for blue-collar workers to do that, and they rely much more on their social networks to find jobs. And that, in turn, again, reinforces the problem as being geographic. Right? So many countries have undertaken these place-based approaches, and there might be lessons to be learned from these experiences. One of the better known one comes from Germany in the Ruhr region, which was a large producer of coal. And there, over the course of several decades, local stakeholders, firms, unions, and so forth, worked together to invest in new infrastructure, to provide new jobs and new resources for coal workers. And that has generally proved reasonably successful. You don't always need the state here, by the way. In South Africa, for instance, a couple of years ago, Eskom, the largest public utility, signed an agreement with coal companies to provide professional training to populations living in coal mining regions. So does that mean that these place-based initiatives are silver bullets? Are they just the solution to all these problems? Well, there are considerable downsides too, aside from the waste that I mentioned earlier. One is that how you implement these policies matters a lot. There's always a risk that firms that try to capitalize on place-based policies, for instance, a local tax cut, don't fulfill their end of the deal. And we call this a form of rent-seeking. And it's a very hard problem to overcome. Another problem is that such policies tend to take a while to have an effect. And in fact, some of them could take several years, for instance, to create new jobs and see new industry blossom, even if they're designed very well. Now, the problem is that the more time you need, the more you are at risk, for instance, of changes of opinions and minds of governments, right? If you elect new leaders who don't think this policy is a priority, under a democratic system, you will see changes in approaches by the government. The problem, of course, is that people on the workers' side may distrust your government to be able to hold its side of the bargain. For instance, consider it, ask yourself, would you quit your job if you had to rely on, say, federal investment promised over the next 5 to 10 years? And lastly, to conclude, we don't always know what works and what doesn't. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have helped the Rust Belt in a different way and more quickly. This means that we also need some humility when we deal with this problem. This makes learning from successes and failures in the US or elsewhere even more important. I hope you found this helpful, and I thank you for your attention.